Traders, how are you? Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy, co-founder of SpeedUp. Today we're going to be doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. The date today is June 28th. Had a little bit of trouble with the video parts. We're going to be able to upload this via audio on YouTube and also Instagram as well. Just want to remind you guys that if you do want to listen to the podcast, all the videos and all the content that we're doing, just search for Day Trading Academy on iTunes or on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast, and you should be able to find it. If not, just leave a comment down below and I'll be happy to add those to the platforms you guys use. Overall, on Monday, stocks were up. This is obviously due to the situation with the ongoing stimulus-fueled economic recovery. The central bank in the U.S. and other countries as well just continue to pour money into the economy to be able to go ahead and try and help it. There's a lot of sentiment, though, from the investors that are a bit cautious due to the fact that we've had a surge in infections from the coronavirus, not only in the U.S. but also the world. On Tuesday, we closed higher. The NASDAQ, which holds most technological companies, hit a record high. This was due to improving economic data, prospect of more government stimulus, and also the reinforcement of hopes of a swift economic recovery that saw a huge jump in tech shares. Don't know if you guys saw as well that a lot of the tech billionaires like Elon Musk and also Bezos absolutely has skyrocketed with since the low that we had in March. On Wednesday, the markets were down. We had the worst day in 2 weeks that ended sharply in red with the fear of the rising quite a surge in COVID-19 infections. There's also been additional quarantine requirements for travel inside of the U.S. and newly proposed tariffs on UE imports. Thursday, the markets were lower as well. The increase in COVID-19 infections and overall lower consumer demand. And Friday, we had a lot of states that were starting to reopen, like Texas and Florida, for example, reimpose business restrictions due to the corona surge. For the week, the Dow was down 3.42%. Overall, for the year, it's down 12.34%. S&P 500 down 2.94% for the week, down 6.86% for the year, and the NASDAQ, although it was down 1.93% for the week, it's still up 8.74% for the year. European markets were mostly lower. Spain was the biggest loser at 3.28% negative. Latin American markets also negative. The coal cap in Colombia was the biggest loser at 4.57%. Africa and the Middle East mostly lower. That was mixed, but the winners weren't very big at all. Saudi Arabia went down 1.70%. And the Far East markets, Thailand was down 3.06%. The Philippines market was down 1.99% for all my traders out there. In Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency news, even though we had the halving 6 weeks ago where the new number of Bitcoin is halved, we have not seen a surge in Bitcoin or the cryptos just yet. Bitcoin was down for the week at 0.63% negative at about 9,123.44 cents. Financial and banking news. Macron, which is the head of the France economy, the second largest in Europe, stated that in March, no French company, whatever its size, is going to be allowed to fail or collapse due to the pandemic. The government of France, outside of the huge stimulus that the European Bank is doing, the ECB, they're going to inject $521 billion in order to help their economy recover outside of the EU stimulus. Commodities. Oil prices tumbled on Wednesday over 5%. It was about just over $2 a barrel due to the fact that there was a situation where crude storage hit another record last week. U.S. crude went down 3.27% to $38.94. It's still down just under 40% for the year. International crude or petroleum, which is called Brent, went down 2.85% to about $41.02. It's still down just over 38% for the year. Tuesday, gold went up above $1,777 an ounce. It's the highest level in nearly 8 years. I don't know if you guys remember some of the recaps and videos that I was doing over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, where I talked about the best investments being gold and silver, right? Due to the situation with the crisis. I obviously remember this is for educational purposes only. I don't recommend investments. We're not trading advisors. But remember that we did talk about that, and now gold is up over 40% from a year ago, which is something that's incredible. Another thing that I forgot to mention in regards to oil was that China now has 788 million barrels in its strategic petroleum reserve, which doesn't include the large commercial reserves as well. China could actually reach about 1.15 billion barrels of total inventory in 2020, which is roughly 4 months worth of oil. Now remember that China actually overtook the US as the largest importer of oil in the world. And that gives them a huge leverage over oil exporters like Russia and Saudi Arabia, because they could simply decide to not import any oil. That would be about 2 million barrels per day immediately, and it would cause crude prices to plunge by a staggering amount. Overall precious metals for the week: gold went up 1.58% to 1,772. Silver went up 1.01% to $17.90. In political news, the Polish president Andrzej Duda, if I pronounced that right, is the first foreign leader to visit President Trump since the coronavirus. Two leaders are looking forward to signing a defense agreement, which is going to send more troops from the U.S. That are stationed in Germany to Poland and provide a counterweight against Russian aggression, even though Duda, the president of Poland, does face the re-election on Sunday. Taiwan has quietly allowed a lot of the Hong Kong protesters to stay on the island since October, and is now offering support to more of them as China does impose the new national security law. Remember that there was an agreement between the UK and China to allow Hong Kong to be independent of China's system, but they defied that deal, and now they are creating a lot of abuses and putting Hong Kong under their main system in China, which is why Taiwan, which has been quote unquote the arch enemy of China, because China considers them to be a rogue province, whereas Taiwan considers themselves to be an independent country, is kind of been a nail in China's side, providing support to these people from Hong Kong. In economic news, France is actually returned to growth in June, while the rest of the EU continued to decline or stagnate. The French GDP expanded for the first time since February, now that coronavirus restrictions were eased and domestic consumption began again. The reason why, just so you know, is because France is more of a domestic economy compared to Germany, for example, which is more export driven, right? We buy Mercedes cars, we buy German industrial and engineering things. They always say German engineering. So that's part of the reason why France continued to grow. The IMF is slashing the global economic forecast for 2020, saying that the coronavirus pandemic is going to cause a much steeper recession and a slower recovery than initially expected. Initially, they were expecting it to contract by only 3% in the world, and now they think it's going to contract by 4.9%. The OECD is reporting as well that this is the worst peacetime recession. It could be the worst in 100 years and the deepest economic contraction since the Great Depression in the 1930s. Nearly 1.48 million people filed for initial U.S. jobless claims last week versus predictions of 1.35 million. It's the 14th straight week that we've had a process of more than million plus first-time applications for the U.S. jobless benefits. The continuing claims fell by 767,000 to below 20 million finally, to about 19.52 million, while California accounts for the largest surge in claims, which remained over a million for the 14th consecutive week. U.S. consumer spending did rebound by the most on record in May, which accounts for nearly 70% of U.S. economic activity. It went up by 8.2%. It's the largest increase since the government started tracking it since 1959. Although the gains aren't likely to be sustainable, due to the fact that income is dropping and expected to fall further while millions are losing their unemployment checks starting next month. And I believe I mentioned it earlier here in the pod. I was going to say video, right? In the podcast or the show here, that remember that the consumer spending is still the most important thing in the economy. It's nearly 70% in the United States and definitely over 50, 60% in a lot of the other major economies in the top 10 in the world. In corporate news, shares of Virgin Galactic surged 16% on Monday after signing with NASA what's called the Space Act Agreement. It's a deal that they're going to allow would-be space travelers to train them and organize them to transport them to the International Space Station. Their shares went up 45.45% overall in 2020. And a bit of bright news in the U.S. markets is the tech giants Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Remember, Google has a parent company called Alphabet. Year to date, even in a down market on Wednesday, for example, the Big Five have outperformed the S&P 500. Their decline of 5.4%. Amazon went up 48.4% for the year. Microsoft so far is up 25.5%. Apple is up 22.7%, Facebook is up 14.1%, and Google's parent company Alphabet has climbed 7.5%. Wirecard, which is a German payment system, it's a firm that provides a statement, or excuse me, provides the payment system based out of Germany, has filed for bankruptcy a week after auditors found $2.12 billion in a deficit on its balance sheet, which they later admitted that it's money that they may never have existed. The shares were already suspended for trading before the announcement. It fell nearly 90% and it wiped out $12 billion in market value. German-based Bayer, after buying Monsanto, if you remember, has reached an agreement, a settlement of between 10.1 billion and 10.9 billion of tens of thousands of lawsuits after U.S. plaintiffs allege that the firm's Roundup herbicide causes cancer. As part of the deal, they're going to pay 8.8 to 9.6 billion dollars to resolve the current litigation against Roundup and leave an additional 1.25 billion for additional future litigation as well. Nike is reporting their first quarterly loss on for the first time in over 2 years, hurt by the closures due to the coronavirus. They had to close a lot of their retail stores and the lockdowns. They only lost, however, 3.88% in 2020. Novartis AG and former eye care unit are agreeing to pay $346 million in a settlement to resolve the U.S. criminal and civil charges that they bribed doctors, hospitals, and clinics in Greece and Vietnam to prescribe their drugs and use their surgical product. And the U.S. supermarket operator Albertsons had to downsize their $800 million IPO on Thursday, valuing it around $9.3 billion, excluding debt. It's an attempt to end their private equity ownership, Cerberus Capital Management, multiple attempts to be able to cash out since 2015. And Amazon has also agreed to buy a company called Zoox, which is a self-driving startup, for over $1 billion. That is going to expand their reach in the autonomous vehicle technology. In trade news, Trump administration is at it again with the tariffs. They're threatening to reimpose a 10% tariff on aluminum products from Canada, with a possible announcement coming by the end of this coming week if Canada refuses to impose export restrictions on aluminum. The decision comes just days after the new USMCA trade deal, which is the new NAFTA free trade agreement between Canada, United States, and also Mexico, enters into force in the start of July. And in midweek, they're also weighing new tariffs on France, Germany, Spain, and the UK, worth about $3.1 billion of all the imports from these countries, as the EU prepares to open its borders to international travels. They may expand the ban on U.S. visitors due to the fact that the Europeans are still prohibited from entering the U.S. Due to the virus travel restrictions. Obviously, it has to do with the flare-up with the coronavirus. In technology, cloud computing company called Fastly surpasses Zoom as becoming the best performer among the 10 firms Since the pandemic hit the economy, it recorded a record 64% gain over the past 8 trading days. On Friday, it was up 4%. It's up 226% since the market's peak in February 19, whereas Zoom is up only 159% over the same period. China launches the final satellite, 55th satellite in its Beidou geolocation network, which is meant to rival the US GPS network, which some analysts are saying that's unlikely. It's going to make China a key competitor in the multi-billion-dollar geolocation services market. The new supercomputer in Japan called Fugaku is the most powerful machine known publicly. It's going to now be used to find a potential cure for the coronavirus. It's based in the Center of Computational Science in Kobe called RIKEN, and Fugaku's country is the country's first machine to learn biannual top 500 supercomputer list since 2011. It's literally the most powerful and fastest in the world. Singapore gives final approval to start building 2 5G networks as it moves to have full coverage by 2025. Chinese telecom equipment giant Huawei lost the deal to Nokia and Ericsson to build the next generation networks in Singapore. In investment news, U.S. home sales dropped to their lowest level in over 9.5 years in May. Last month, existing home sales fell by 9.7% to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of about 3.91 million. The forecast was 4.12 million. It's the lowest level since October 2010, strengthening expectations of a sharp contraction in the housing market. Obviously, because of the coronavirus, also indicates a smallest annual home price increase in over 8 years. Also, Dr. Robert Redfield, the director of U.S. Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, claims that the U.S. is going to likely spend about $7 trillion due to the coronavirus, as the U.S. struggles with over 2.3 million confirmed cases with over 121,000 deaths to date. I don't know if you guys have seen that our cases have gone up a lot in the U.S., but our death rate is actually going down substantially, which is great, which means that it's not as potent or it's not as deadly as we initially thought it would be. U.S. International Development Finance Corp is working with firms about reshoring the manufacturing of generic drugs, pharmaceutical ingredients, and PPE, personal protective equipment, back to the U.S. The DFC, along with the Pentagon, intends to jointly administer $100 million in supply chain reshoring money from $2.3 billion in coronavirus funds to be able to leverage tens of billions of dollars in loans as a use of capital. Essentially, we're trying to bring back all the critical items back to the U.S. from overseas, mainly China. India officials suspended $600 million in deals with Chinese firms after the deadly border crash with China. Economic growth in India was already slowing long before the crisis, and the GDP projection is expected to shrink this year, the projection for the first time since 1979. In Microsoft, they plan to close all their physical stores permanently. They're going to focus their efforts online where consumers can pay and also get support and training. They're going to take about a $450 million write-down for the cost of that. And in international events, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says that pubs, hotels, and restaurants could reopen as early as next month as they're starting to ease. The pandemic lockdown has all but shut down the economy almost completely. He's been under a lot of pressure from businesses and also members of his governing Conservative Party to relax restrictions, but he's been resisting due to the fear of prompting a second wave of infections. Saudi Arabia came under a missile and drone attack from Iran-backed Yemeni rebels, targeting the capital and other cities as well. International efforts to end their 5-year war has stalled. They were able to intercept 4 ballistic missiles as well as 8 explosive-laden drones launched by Houthi rebels in at Riyadh, Najran, and also Jazan. Those Arabic named cities that are hard to pronounce. China and Japan are let's say, having increased tensions from both claimed uninhabited islands as their own. And they are Japanese administered since 1972. In Japan, they're known as the Sakakus Islands, whereas in China, they're known as the Diaoyus Islands. As the China military expands its reach in the East China Sea, tensions obviously are rising. Taiwan also claims the archipelago. And if something does happen where China does attack Japan, we have a treaty with Japan that we would have to defend Japan if it's attacked, if the territory is attacked. UN Secretary General Guterres is urging Israel to abandon its plans to annex settlements in the occupied West Bank. It warns that it threatens to project the let me start that over. It warns to threaten the prospects of peace with Palestinians, and it claims that the constitute most serious violation of international law while harming the prospect of a two-state solution, including undercutting possibilities of new negotiations as well. The U.S. Navy's top admiral in Europe says a Russian buildup in the Mediterranean Sea is turning into one of the most militarized zones in the world, warning that Russia could cement its dominance in the region if it's allowed to gain foothold in Libya as it has done in Syria. And in unusual facts this week, there was a rather powerful earthquake, magnitude 7.4, that struck southern Mexico on the Pacific coast on Tuesday. That's the left side. It killed at least 6 and seriously injured othered in isolated villages, causing damages to hundreds of miles away from Mexico City, buildings and all kinds of things. I don't know if you guys remember, I believe 2 or 3 years ago, there was a powerful earthquake in Mexico City. And it's what I've been mentioning to you guys over and over again, how the next 10 years are really going to be challenging economically. We're going to have a lot of problems with the economy, with social problems. We can see all that starting to show as well now. And just in general, over the next 10 years, we're probably going to have a lot of problems, including with the environment as well. Hundreds of billions of desert locusts have been swarming through Yemeni Houthi-held capital of Sana'a on Wednesday. They've been invading and wiping out crops, leaving farmers in utter despair. They've also found a huge swath of these in Argentina, they're terrified because they think that's going to go through Paraguay and also Brazil as well. And in a boost for Samsung's group hired J.Y. Lee in his defense, the external review panel in South Korea recommends that prosecutors do not indict Lee over a 2015 merger and alleged accounting fraud from the Supreme Prosecutor's Office stated. In Egypt, they're looking for an international pressure to get a deal that it sees as crucial with Ethiopia over the water supplies of the Nile River. If you guys don't know, Ethiopia is actually building a giant dam upstream, and that water flows through not only Sudan, which is a neighbor of Ethiopia, but eventually Egypt, which is a neighbor of Sudan. And if you guys don't know, the Nile River is, along where just so you can get an idea visually where this is at, it's along where the pyramids of Giza, the pyramids of Egypt are at. And the majority of the population in Egypt actually lives along the river. And so for them, it's a problem that Ethiopia is going to put a dam up because it threatens their water supply. So negotiations have been spanning almost 10 years, even though the two nations and Sudan have had no agreement of how Ethiopia is going to operate and fill the reservoir and the dam. And JD Power and Associates has released its annual quality study. Tesla, the popular electric car company, ranked last among 32 automotive brands it measured. The initial quality study, now in its 34th year, measures vehicle quality for the first 90 days of ownership, found Tesla suffered 250 problems for 100 vehicles reported by buyers. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to like the video. I do these free for you guys to be able to go ahead and have you guys learn about what's going on in the world and helping some of your investment prospects. Even though, remember, this is for educational purposes only. We're not trading advisors. We don't trade people's money. But either way, don't forget to subscribe and don't forget to like during the video. That it helps a lot the YouTube algorithm. We'll see you next week.